It's around 7:30 a.m. on December the 7th, 1941. On the Hawaiian island of Oahu, at the American naval base of Pearl Harbor, the US Pacific Fleet stands tall and proud. Grand warships, fighter planes, and aircraft hangars warm up in the sun, and as gentle waves lap against the dock, American servicemen and women start their day. They roll over their bunks, chat over coffee, and smoke cigarettes. It's another day in paradise. Or so they think. In less than 30 minutes, Pearl Harbor will fall victim to one of the most devastating surprise attacks in history. Why? Because right now, more than 400 bombers and fighter planes are closing in from the north and the south of the island, and they're ready to unleash hell on everyone below. Thousands are about to die burning and screaming. Warships with long, illustrious histories will be reduced to scrap metal in seconds. The docks of Pearl Harbor will be washed with blood and fire. And amid all the destruction, the world will reach a dramatic turning point. For today is the day that America finally joins the Second World War. At 7:55 a.m, the calm quiet of Pearl Harbor is disturbed by the loud clanging of an alarm. Officers are being called to battle stations. What's this, they ask? A drill? As they scramble to get a better view out over the sea, they see the blue sky above turn dark. A shadow, cast by a tight formation of planes, is moving towards them, and it shows no signs of slowing down. The planes drop to eye level. They're aiming directly for the harbour. Further away, they hear the sounds of shots being fired. American pilots radio into the base, but it's frantic and garbled. Pearl Harbor can't decipher it. Clearly, something is happening. Something very bad indeed. Then, as the planes pass overhead, the servicemen of Pearl Harbor look up and, to their horror, they finally realise the gravity of the situation. Beneath the wings of the planes are two big red circles. These are the rising suns of the Imperial Japanese Navy, and it can only mean one thing. Pearl Harbor is under attack. There's no time to react. The first torpedo has already been launched. It hurls through the water, sending ripples across the surface, and explodes into the side of a warship. Seawater washes over the Navy officers still waking up inside. Those already on their feet are running through winding corridors as twisted metal is thrown towards them by the explosions. As they make it out on deck, they throw themselves into the sea. Outside, across the harbour, bombs are raining from the sky, setting buildings, hangars, and aircraft ablaze. Another warship, the USS Arizona, explodes in the dock. Over 1,000 people still trapped inside are ripped apart by the blast. Twisted metal and body parts are strewn across the dock. As the people of Pearl Harbor look around, they see that many of their warships are badly damaged, sinking in the port, or have completely capsized. Officers are jumping from the decks into the sea, but they're jumping into an ocean now covered in 6 inches of leaking oil. And that oil is catching fire. They hold their breath to try and swim underwater to escape the walls of flame growing around them, but even the sea beneath them is heating up. All across Pearl Harbor, men and women are clutching burns and injuries. Some are on fire, screaming out in pain as the flesh melts from their bones. Others are holding limbs that have been blown off, staggering around in confusion, and still the planes keep flying overhead, one wave after another. Bombs, torpedoes, and volleys of bullets from Japanese fighters shred American sailors into pieces. Far away across the island, terrified civilians watch huge pillars of black smoke rise into the sky as the screams of 1,000 people carry on the air. 75 minutes later, the skies finally fall silent. The planes of the Imperial Japanese Navy fly away, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction, one that will change the course of World War II forever. The attack on Pearl Harbor came as a surprise, but the seeds of resentment between Japan and the US had been planted long before December of 1941. In the 1930s, Japan had big ambitions. It wanted to create an empire, something to rival even that of the US and the UK, perhaps. But there was something standing in its way. See, there are very few natural resources in Japan, like iron, coal, and oil. And you need all these to fuel such an empire. Faced with this obstacle, Japan chose the path of any budding world empire in the 20th century. Aggression. Japan started by invading the Chinese province of Manchuria, which had an almost limitless supply of raw materials, and then set up a puppet state called Manchukuo. Over the years, Japan pushed further and further into northern China, until war broke out between the two countries in 1937. Despite early victories, along with a wide range of atrocities, such as the Nanking event, Japan was eventually pushed back by the Chinese, who were growing in strength. Drained by the war, Japan decided on a new plan. On the quest for natural resources, it turned instead to Southeast Asia, to Thailand, Burma, the Philippines, and with plans for all of these to ultimately be under occupation. This is when the West really started to pay attention. Japan's ambition was concerning. Already the West was grappling with Hitler's Nazi Party. It did not need another regime popping up in the Far East and threatening its colonial reach. The UK, US, and Netherlands decided to act. They froze Japanese assets in their countries and enforced strict sanctions in an attempt to slow down the march of Japan's power-hungry and savage empire. These sanctions included a massive 90% cut for raw materials, which Japan desperately needed to support its empire and war ambitions. In tow, it had one demand for Japan: stop the aggression against China and Indonesia. But Japan could not stomach the idea of backing down, not after everything it had just invested into its new conquests. And so Japan chose to ignore the West, and instead chose war. And Japan was feeling confident. Its military had been growing for years and was now backed by 2.5 million trained troops and 7,500 aircraft. Its new rival, the United States, stationed relatively nearby at Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiian Islands, suddenly didn't look so intimidating. The US had around 1.5 million ground troops, but most weren't fully trained, and with only about 1,000 combat planes, Japan certainly had a fighting chance in numbers. But the biggest advantage was that America was still neutral. After the First World War, it had embraced isolationism. But public opinion was quietly shifting. Japanese atrocities in China and rising tensions in Europe had Americans debating whether or not to get involved. Japan knew time was running out. The one major obstacle to its imperial ambitions was America's Pacific Fleet, moored at Pearl Harbor. So in 1941, Japanese Fleet Commander Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was given a momentous task: sink the US Pacific Fleet at the earliest convenience. The plan was simple: wipe out that fleet before the US could strike, and Japan would have Southeast Asia to herself. After months of secret planning, Yamamoto got the green light from Japan's Naval General Staff in October 1941. The die was cast. And so at 3:42 AM on December the 7th, 1941, it all begins. In the darkness of the ocean, near the entrance of Pearl Harbor, a periscope pokes up above the water. Just as it's spotted by US patrols, however, it dips back down. At around 6:30 AM, the periscope reappears, this time just 2 miles away. The US has time to act. They radio the USS Ward, a nearby destroyer warship, which fires at the sub. The first shot misses, but the second shot hits, and the sub sinks to the bottom of the ocean. This minor spat between small sea craft is a big moment. These are the first shots fired by the US in World War II, and they're the first of many to come. But so far, the Americans aren't that concerned. It's a mini-sub. They assume it must be rogue. An hour later, however, radar operatives Privates George Elliott Jr. and Joseph Lockhart spot a formation of planes about 50 miles out, heading toward Pearl Harbor. It's the largest blip they've ever seen. They report it to Lieutenant Kermit A. Tyler, but leave out a crucial detail: just how big the formation is. As a result, Tyler isn't concerned. He's new on the job, and he knows that 6 American B-17 bombers are scheduled to arrive today. There's no other explanation for the sighting. Of course, as everyone on Pearl Harbor is about to find out, these officers have just ignored an incoming formation of enemy planes, and by ignoring it, they've already sealed their fate. At 7:55 a.m., everyone on Pearl Harbor learns the truth. This is an attack. The first wave is led by slow-moving Japanese torpedo bombers. Using the element of surprise, they head straight for their main target, America's battleships. Torpedoes explode on the sides of the USS Helena, Utah, and Raleigh, all docked on the west side of Oahu Island. From the east, more bombers hit the USS Oklahoma. It rolls on its side and sinks under the water, while 400 sailors aboard throw themselves into the sea in a desperate bid to survive. Every ship in the harbour is completely exposed. There's no escape and nothing anybody can do. The entire Pacific Fleet is being destroyed before their eyes. And they're sitting ducks for the whole show. Another torpedo sinks the USS West Virginia, and one explodes in the sides of the USS California, which had been prepared that morning for inspection. Its watertight doors are wide open, and when the torpedo strikes, sailors desperately try to close them before the ocean rushes in. It's all far too late. Another bomb hits the ship's upper deck, bounces off the second deck, and then explodes inside, instantly killing another 50 sailors. At the same time, dive bombers fly overhead and target air bases across Oahu Island. The first wave of 183 planes, led by Japanese Commander Mitsuo Fushida, passes over the harbour equipped with armour-piercing bombs. And things only get worse from then on. At 8:10 a.m., just 15 minutes after the attack begins, a 1,800-pound bomb smashes through the deck of the USS Arizona and strikes its ammunition magazine. Sailors nearby hear a large sucking sound, and then, with no warning, the entire warship explodes in the dock. Its blast turret is thrown into the air, and a giant fireball throws twisted pieces of metal and human limbs onto nearby ships. The 1,000 men inside the USS Arizona are torn apart by the explosion. Some men are still trapped in the Arizona's control tower. They're badly burned, and the inferno below is quickly rising towards them. One officer, 26-year-old Joe George, throws them a line, and one by one they climb across to safety. These are the lucky ones. Other sailors trying to escape their sinking ships are met with an almost 100-foot drop into the ocean, which is covered by a thick, fiery oil slick. On the decks of nearby warships, men fully engulfed by flames stumble around aimlessly with their arms outstretched. Some throw themselves in the water, and they sizzle on impact as the fire is extinguished. When they come back to the surface, they're completely white. The fire has burned up their skin and hair. These are their final torturous moments of life against the backdrop of the Pacific Ocean, a paradise, now turned to hell with smoke and fire. By now, it looks like the whole of Pearl Harbor is ablaze. Survivors, scrambling for safety, are choking on the foul smell of burning fuel and exploding gunpowder. With the fire burning up all the oxygen around, they can't catch their breath, and thick smoke fills their noses, throats, and lungs. The noise is deafening too. One explosion comes after another, with each one followed by the angry sound of metal tearing apart. After each dive bomber drops a torpedo, another fighter plane rains down machine gun bullets onto the people remaining below. They rip up the decks of the ships and shred sailors into ribbons. As the Americans look up at the passing planes, they see the Japanese pilots smiling and waving back down at them. But the Americans do fight back. One by one, they man what's left of their turrets, anti-aircraft guns, and fighter planes. Second Lieutenant Kenneth M. Taylor and George Welch, for instance, still wearing their tuxedos from the Christmas party the night before, rush out to their aircraft to join the battle in the skies. It's a valiant attempt, and in the return fire, they even manage to bring down some Japanese aircraft and submarines. But many of those most dangerous bombers are too high up. The Americans can't get their shells to reach them. They're just shooting and hoping. It's all they have left. With every shot that misses, the terror sinks in. They don't stand a chance. What's more, the ruptured warships are letting in more and more water, and it's frying their electrical systems. This means that many of them can't even activate the anti-aircraft guns needed to shoot the Japanese out of the sky. And then, just as the chaos reaches its expected crescendo, a second attack wave arrives at 8:54 a.m. 171 Japanese planes, including fighters, dive bombers, and high-altitude bombers, scream overhead and drop more bombs on the already savaged warships. However, compared to the first wave, the second is a disaster. It's chaotic and disorganized, and it doesn't hit any of its intended targets, the American cruisers. The second wave is defeated by a defender that nobody saw coming: the weather. As Japanese pilots approach Pearl Harbor from above, they look down to see nothing. A solid white blanket of clouds separates them from their target. They have no idea where they are. A cloud front is rapidly moving in, and the pilots above, already being told that they carry the future of the Japanese Empire on their backs, can't see a thing. Worst yet, their radios were playing static. They couldn't communicate with their commander, and they were stranded. All in all, this meant that the second wave did not achieve its aims. But by now, though, the damage has been done. Pearl Harbor is a mess. Sinking ships and burning bodies litter the dock. Buildings are riddled with bullet holes, and the ocean is engulfed in fire. The USS Nevada, trying to escape, runs ground in the entrance to the harbor, while entire squadrons of fighter planes lie on the ground like broken toys, their engines reduced to piles of molten aluminium. Then, at 10 a.m., just 90 minutes after the attack started, the survivors of Pearl Harbor look up to see the Japanese planes flying away. It's over. In the smoldering ruins of Pearl Harbor, around 2,400 American servicemen and women lie dead. Hundreds more are injured or missing. 21 US warships are damaged or destroyed. Nearly 200 aircraft have been wiped out. It's a day, as President Franklin D. Roosevelt will soon tell Congress, that will live in infamy and would violently end America's neutrality in the Second World War.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the US Navy was reeling. The Allies were stunned. Japan, however, fresh from its victory, moved fast. It attacked the Philippines just hours later and sank two major British battleships off the coast of Malaya, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. Winston Churchill later recalled, "In all the war I never received a more direct shock. As I turned and twisted in bed, the full horror of the news sank in upon me. There were no British or American capital ships in the Indian Ocean or the Pacific. Over this vast expanse of waters, Japan was supreme, and we everywhere were weak and naked." Tragically, the attack on Pearl Harbor might not have been a surprise had the US communicated better. On the day of the attack, Japan sent a handwritten message to Washington. The note threatened war if sanctions weren't lifted. It gave a very specific deadline of 7:30 a.m. Hawaii time. But the US didn't get what any of this meant. Or it didn't care. After all, it was a neutral country and saw no need to defend Hawaii against a large attack. And then just minutes before the actual attack, another urgent warning reached Pacific Command, but again, poor communication meant it arrived too late. Would the US have acted even with proper warning? It's hard to say. At the time, most American leaders simply did not believe Japan posed a serious threat. The Imperial Army was stretched thin across Asia, and launching a bold new offensive in the Pacific seemed unthinkable. A local Honolulu paper even ran a story the day before the attack, saying Japan was too weak to challenge the United States. Had America realized the truth, it might have been more prepared. More lives might have been saved. Nonetheless, the day after the attack, President Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan, and it obliged. After years of discussion, the US officially joined the Second World War. The country was now united over a tragedy that would be used time and again throughout the war as propaganda. 9 hours later, the UK declared war on Japan too. There was a silver lining here, though. America was not on its knees after Pearl Harbor. Although it was very close, the Japanese, partly thanks to the chaos of their second wave, failed to destroy the harbor's most important facilities, including oil storage depots, shipyards, submarine docks, and repair shops. What's more, All 3 US Pacific Fleet aircraft carriers were at sea during the attack. They escaped untouched. This meant that despite its casualties, the US Navy was actually about to bounce back from the attack. Its aircraft carriers in particular would play a crucial role in the Pacific War. Although Pearl Harbor brought Japan a short-term victory, it ultimately created a long-term disaster for the Imperial Empire. By dragging the US into the Second World War, Japan had signed its own death warrant, one that would be decided in the horrific climax at Hiroshima and Nagasaki a few years later. And you can watch my video on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima here.